381 Navy SEALs trapped in a valley. Ammunition running low, enemy closing in from every ridge. Command had already started writing the loss report. The radio crackled in the command center at Kandahar Air Base. The voice on the other end fought to maintain composure, but the strain was unmistakable. This is Trident Actual. We are surrounded on three sides. Multiple SAM sites confirmed. Requesting immediate air support. In the dim light of the Tactical Operations Center, Colonel Robert Sanderson stared at the topographical display, his weathered face betraying no emotion, as he surveyed the digital representation of what everyone already called Death Valley. His finger traced the ridge lines where Taliban fighters had established overlapping fields of fire. F-16s estimate time to target? Sanderson asked. 15 minutes, sir, a communications officer replied. But they are confirming they cannot engage within 100 meters of friendly positions. The colonel's jaw tightened. And how close is the enemy to our men? 25 to 50 meters, sir. Closing fast. Silence fell across the room. Everyone present understood the math. The rules of engagement prevented air support from firing within 100 meters of friendly forces. The enemy was well inside that perimeter. The SEALs were by doctrine unreachable. Begin drafting the casualty notification protocols, Sanderson ordered quietly, and get me direct contact with CENTCOM. As officers scrambled to follow orders, no one noticed Captain Alexandra "Alex" Harrington standing at the back of the room, her piercing blue eyes fixed on the tactical display, mind racing through calculations no one else was making. Everyone had always said she was too emotional, too impulsive, too dangerous for the cockpit of an A-10 Thunderbolt II. Today, those same qualities might be the only hope for 381 Americans trapped in a kill box that doctrine said was impossible to escape. At 34, Captain Alexandra Harrington carried the weight of legacy in every step. Her tall, athletic frame moved with the precision of someone who understood both physics and purpose. Her blonde hair was regulation short, her uniform pressed to perfection, her posture impeccable. Yet it was her eyes that commanded attention. Ice blue and calculating, constantly evaluating, seeing possibilities others missed. Alex was a second-generation A-10 pilot. Her father, Major James Harrington, had flown the Warthog during Desert Storm, becoming a legend among close air support pilots for his precision and courage. The photograph on her desk showed him standing proudly beside his aircraft call sign, Havoc, painted on the fuselage, his smile confident beneath aviator sunglasses. He never returned from his final mission. January 1991, a squadron of Marines pinned down outside Kuwait City. Rules of engagement, preventing air support from firing within 100 meters of friendly forces. Her father had made a choice that saved 36 Marines and cost him his life when enemy anti-aircraft fire found his A-10 as he executed a dangerously low approach. Alex had been in her mother's womb when the officers arrived at their door. 7 months pregnant, Catherine Harrington had accepted the folded flag with quiet dignity, later telling her daughter, "Your father understood that sometimes when lives are on the line, rules must come second to duty." Those words became Alex's North Star. At the Air Force Academy, her instructors noted her natural flying ability and her troubling independence. Harrington flies like she's dancing with the aircraft. One evaluation read, but displays concerning disregard for established protocols when she believes alternative approaches would be more effective. What they saw as insubordination, Alex saw as innovation. What they labeled recklessness, she considered calculated risk. While her classmates memorized doctrine, Alex questioned it, earning the nickname Maverick, not always meant as a compliment. Upon graduation, she requested assignment to the A-10 program following her father's contrails. Despite resistance from commanders concerned about her attitude problem, her test scores and simulator performance couldn't be denied. She earned her wings and eventually her place in the cockpit of the aircraft her father had flown. The same aircraft that might now be the only hope for 381 American lives. "You keep staring at that map like it's going to change, Captain." The gruff voice belonged to Colonel William Iron Bill Blackwood, a 68-year-old former pilot who now served as a special advisor to Air Combat Command. His weathered face carried the lines of someone who had seen too much war to be impressed by rank or protocol. His silver hair was still cut military short, his posture ramrod straight despite his age. Alex didn't turn from the wall map of the Korengal Valley she'd been studying. Not trying to change it, sir. Trying to understand it. Iron Bill stepped closer, his voice dropping. What do you see that others don't? A way in. Her finger traced a contour line on the map. This ridgeline has a natural shadow but doesn't appear on satellite imagery unless you know exactly what you're looking for. My father wrote about similar terrain features in his journal. The older man studied her face. William Blackwood had flown during the Cold War conducting classified operations over Cuba, Grenada, and other hotspots that officially never happened. More importantly, he had been James Harrington's mentor and friend. Your old man would be proud, Alex. You've got his eye. And his stubbornness, according to Colonel Sanderson. Iron Bill snorted. Sanderson is a good officer who never met a regulation he didn't worship. He fights wars by the book. But wars don't read books, Alex finished quoting her father. Exactly. Iron Bill glanced over his shoulder to ensure they were alone. Listen, I've been watching you. The extra hours in the simulator, the terrain studies the ballistic calculations you're running when you think no one's paying attention. You're preparing for something. Alex finally turned from the map. Just trying to be thorough, sir. Bullshit. The word carried no heat, just certainty. You're seeing something in those valleys that has you worried. Something no one else is picking up on. For a moment, Alex considered deflection, then decided on truth. The Taliban have changed their tactics. They're setting up kill zones specifically designed to exploit our rules of engagement. They position just close enough to our forces that air support can't engage. It's like they've read our playbook. Have you brought this to Sanderson? 3 times. He says I'm overreacting. Iron Bill's eyes narrowed. Show me what you've got. Alex led him to her quarters where maps, satellite images, and handwritten calculations covered one wall. She pointed to a series of marked positions. These are the last 4 engagements where we lost Special Forces teams. Notice the pattern. The enemy never initiates until our men are in these specific geographical features. Natural bowls with limited escape routes and terrain that puts the enemy just inside our ROE safety buffer. The older officer studied the data, his expression darkening. They're creating doctrine-proof kill boxes. Yes, sir, and I believe the Korengal mission is walking right into another one. Iron Bill was silent for a long moment, then asked, what would you do differently? I'd change how we support troops in these scenarios. The A-10 can place rounds with surgical precision much closer than the 100-meter restriction if the pilot is properly trained. She pulled out a notebook filled with ballistic calculations. I've been practicing in the simulator. 25-meter separation is achievable with controlled half-second bursts at specific angles of attack. That's dangerously close, Alex. War is dangerously close, sir. And 381 men are about to find that out the hard way. The veteran pilot regarded her with a mixture of concern and respect. Learn the terrain, know your enemy, prepare for the day when you might have to do what no one else will dare. Your father taught me that. Alex's expression softened. He taught me too through you and Mom. Every story you shared helped me know him. Iron Bill squeezed her shoulder. Keep preparing. I pray you never need these calculations, but if you do. He left the thought unfinished. Both knew exactly what he meant. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, affectionately called the Warthog by those who flew it, was arguably the ugliest aircraft in the United States inventory, and unquestionably one of the most effective. Built around the massive GAU-88A Avenger 30mm cannon, it was essentially a flying tank designed for one purpose: close air support for ground troops. The GAU-88 fired depleted uranium rounds at 200 rounds per minute, 70 rounds per second, with enough force to tear through tank armor like paper. The recoil was so powerful that the entire aircraft would momentarily slow in flight when the trigger was pulled. For Alex, the A-10 was more than a weapon system. It was a family legacy, a connection to the father she'd never met. The aircraft's straight wings, twin engines mounted high on the fuselage, and distinctive shark-mouth paint scheme were as familiar to her as her own reflection. On this particular morning, Alex walked the flight line at 0530, running her hand along the fuselage of her assigned aircraft tail number A-10C 80-0279. While other pilots were still asleep, she performed her own additional pre-flight checks, memorizing every detail of the machine, that might one day be the difference between life and death for the men and women on the ground. You're making the rest of us look bad, Captain. Tech Sergeant Sarah Wilson approached with a clipboard, her dark hair pulled back in a tight regulation bun, her uniform already showing sweat stains from the Afghan heat. Just being thorough, Sergeant. Uh-huh. And the fact that Colonel Sanderson will be observing training flights today has nothing to do with it. Alex smiled slightly. Maybe I just enjoy the company of my favorite crew chief. Sarah had been maintaining Alex's A-10 for the past 18 months. They developed the kind of trust that was essential between pilot and mechanic, the understanding that both their lives depended on the other's attention to detail. Well, your baby is in perfect condition as always. Sarah handed over the maintenance log. But word around the base is that Sanderson has you penciled in for a logistics run today, not combat training. Alex's expression hardened. What? Overheard him telling Major Peterson that you're too emotional for today's close air support scenarios. Said he needs steady leadership for the new pilots. The words stung but didn't surprise. Since arriving at Kandahar, Alex had butted heads with Sanderson repeatedly over tactical approaches and rules of engagement. The colonel valued predictability and procedure above all else, qualities that made him an excellent administrator, but in Alex's private opinion, a dangerously rigid combat commander. Thanks for the heads up, Alex said, signing the maintenance log and handing it back. What are you going to do? My job, be ready. As Sarah departed, Alex climbed up to the cockpit, settling into the seat that had come to feel more like home than any apartment or barracks she'd ever lived in. She ran her fingers over the controls, checking switches and indicators with practiced precision. In her mind, she wasn't preparing for a logistics run. She was preparing for the day when everything would go wrong and only the Warthog could make it right. The briefing room buzzed with pre-mission energy. Pilots reviewed routes, weapons loadouts, and intelligence reports. Major Michael Chen, the operations officer, was walking through the day's assignments when Colonel Sanderson entered, causing the room to snap to attention. As you were, Sanderson said, his voice crisp and authoritative. At 52, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had climbed the ranks through meticulous adherence to protocol. His Desert Storm service ribbons were prominently displayed on his perfectly pressed uniform. Gentlemen, he continued conspicuously, looking past Alex, the only female pilot in the room. Today's exercises will focus on formation work with the new pilots. Major Peterson will lead Alpha Flight. Captain Reynolds, you'll take Bravo. Alex waited, knowing what was coming. Captain Harrington. Sanderson finally acknowledged her. You'll be running supply coordination with the logistics team today. I need steady leadership for the trainees. The subtext was clear to everyone in the room. Alex wasn't trusted with combat training. Sir, she responded evenly. With respect, I've logged more simulator hours on close air support scenarios than any pilot in the squadron. The new aviators could benefit from that experience. Sanderson's expression cooled. Your technical skills aren't in question, Captain. Leadership requires following orders and protocols without improvisation. That's what these young pilots need to learn, even when those protocols might be exploited by the enemy. The room went silent. Challenging a commanding officer in front of the squadron was unheard of. Sanderson's voice dropped dangerously. Are you suggesting our doctrine is flawed, Captain? I'm suggesting it may have vulnerabilities the enemy has identified. The last 4 special operations casualties occurred in scenarios where, that will be all, Captain. Sanderson cut her off. Track equipment and coordinate with logistics today. That's an order. Yes, sir. Alex knew when to retreat from a battle she couldn't win, today. As the briefing concluded and pilots dispersed to their assignments, Major Chen approached her. That was bold, he said quietly. Michael Chen had been operations officer for 6 months. At 40, he was caught between generations. Old enough to respect tradition, young enough to recognize when innovation was necessary. He and Alex had developed a cautious professional alliance. It was necessary, she replied. The Taliban are adapting faster than our doctrine. Chen glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. I've reviewed your analysis. The pattern is concerning. Concerning enough to change how we support ground forces. That's above my pay grade. Chen hesitated, but not above Lieutenant Colonel Hayes. He's here from the Pentagon Inspector General's office, evaluating operational effectiveness. Alex hadn't known the Pentagon had sent an observer. This could be an opportunity. Where can I find him? He's shadowing Sanderson today. Chen checked his watch. Look, I can't officially support going around the chain of command, but hypothetically, Hayes takes coffee alone at the East Mess tent every morning at 0600. Alex nodded her understanding. Hypothetically, that's useful information. Chen gave her a warning look. Sanderson doesn't forget challenges to his authority, Alex. Be careful. Always am. But as she headed to her logistics assignment, Alex knew she was walking a dangerous line. In the military, the chain of command was sacred. Going outside it, even for valid concerns, could end a career. The question was whether 381 lives were worth that risk. Night fell over Kandahar Air Base, bringing relative cool to the Afghan desert. Most personnel were either sleeping or engaged in essential operations. The flight simulator building stood dark except for a single room where light seeped from beneath a closed door. Inside, Alex sat in the A-10 simulator's cockpit, running her 47th iteration of the same scenario, friendlies surrounded in a valley, enemy forces at close-range terrain, preventing standard approaches. The simulator screen displayed a digital recreation of the Korangal Valley. Blue markers indicated friendly forces in a natural depression. Red markers showed enemy positions on 3 ridgelines, many just 25-50 meters from the blue icons. Alex's hands moved with practiced precision over the controls. She executed a steep dive at an unconventional angle, released a half-second burst of simulated 30mm fire, then broke hard left and climbed. The computer assessed enemy position neutralized. No friendly fire casualties. She reset the scenario, adjusting the enemy positions to be even closer to friendly forces, then ran it again, and again, and again. Each iteration refined her approach. Each successful run built muscle memory for maneuvers no training program taught. Each simulated mission prepared her for a scenario the Air Force officially considered impossible to support. At 0300, Alex finally shut down the simulator and returned to her quarters. She spent 30 minutes updating her handwritten ballistics journal with new calculations before finally allowing herself 3 hours of sleep. As the sun rose over the mountains, she was already awake, reviewing terrain maps and preparing for a meeting that might never happen with a Pentagon official who might not listen. Her father's voice seemed to whisper from her memory. Preparation isn't about guarantees, Alex. It's about being ready when opportunity meets necessity. Lieutenant Colonel James Hayes was exactly where Major Chen had suggested he would be, alone at a corner table in the East Mess tent, reviewing documents while nursing a cup of black coffee. At 45, Hayes carried himself with the measured confidence of someone who evaluated others for a living. His inspection insignia identified him as part of the Pentagon's Inspector General team. Alex approached with 2 fresh coffees, setting one beside Hayes' empty cup. "Mind if I join you, sir? I'm Captain Alexandra Harrington." Hayes looked up, his expression neutral, but evaluating. "The A-10 pilot Colonel Sanderson mentioned at yesterday's command briefing." "Please have a seat, Captain." Alex sat, noting that Hayes had immediately identified her. "I'm guessing the Colonel's comments weren't entirely complimentary." A hint of a smile crossed Hayes' face. "He described you as technically proficient but dangerously independent. Coming from Sanderson, I consider that high praise." "You know him well." "We served together during Desert Storm. Sanderson is an excellent officer by traditional metrics. He follows orders impeccably and expects the same." Hayes studied her face. "I suspect you are not here to discuss your commanding officer's leadership style at 0600. "No, sir." Alex placed a folder on the table. "I'm here because I believe we have a critical vulnerability in our close air support doctrine that the enemy has identified and exploited. It's already cost American lives, and I believe it will kill many more if not addressed." Hayes didn't reach for the folder immediately. "This is something you've brought to Colonel Sanderson." "3 times, sir. He believes I'm overreacting. And you're circumventing your chain of command because 381 Navy SEALs and support personnel are currently preparing for insertion into the exact type of terrain where we've lost 4 special operations teams in the past 6 months." Alex met his gaze directly. Sometimes protocol must take a back seat to preventing a massacre. Hayes considered her for a long moment, then opened the folder. He reviewed the contents methodically. Satellite imagery, terrain analysis, pattern, identification of previous casualties, in ballistic calculations for alternative close air support approaches. You've put considerable work into this, Captain, he finally said. Yes, sir. These simulator results, achieving effective fire within 25 meters of friendly forces, they're impressive. Also well outside established safety parameters. The parameters were established for conventional warfare, sir. The enemy has adapted. We haven't. Hayes closed the folder. What exactly are you requesting? A review of close air support doctrine for special operations in restricted terrain. Authorization for limited testing of adjusted safety parameters with properly trained pilots. And Alex hesitated, then committed an immediate reassessment of the planned Korengal Valley operation. That's a significant ask, Captain. The potential loss of 381 Americans justifies significant action, sir. Hayes studied her with newfound intensity. You truly believe this mission is walking into a trap? I do, sir. The intelligence reports show the exact pattern we've seen before. The Taliban are positioning forces specifically to exploit our ROE limitations. I'll review your analysis thoroughly, Captain. Hayes checked his watch. I have a meeting with Colonel Sanderson in 30 minutes. I'll discuss appropriate next steps after that. Thank you, sir. Alex stood to leave. Captain Harrington. Hayes's voice stopped her. Your father was Major James Harrington, correct? Desert Storm, 23rd Fighter Group. Surprise. Alex nodded. Yes, sir. I was a young lieutenant when he made his final flight. His actions saved my best friend's life that day. Hayes's expression softened slightly. He made a choice between procedure and people. It seems you've inherited his perspective. Highest compliment I could receive, sir. It wasn't entirely meant as one. That choice cost your father his life. Alex met his gaze steadily. Some prices are worth paying, sir. As she walked away, Hayes called after her. I'll give your analysis fair consideration, Captain. That's all I can promise. It was more than she'd gotten from anyone else. The Tactical Operations Center erupted with activity at 13:47 hours. Emergency transmissions flooded in from the Korengal Valley, where the SEAL insertion had gone catastrophically wrong. Just as Alex had predicted, Taliban forces had allowed the Americans to enter the valley before revealing their positions on the surrounding ridgelines. Alex stood at the back of the room, watching the nightmare scenario unfold exactly as she had feared. The digital map showed blue friendly indicators surrounded by red enemy positions. Many of the red markers were within 50 meters of friendly forces, well inside the 100-meter minimum engagement distance for air support. Colonel Sanderson's voice cut through the chaos. Status of QRF. 40 minutes out, sir, a communications officer replied. F-16s. 15 minutes to station. But, sir, they're reporting they cannot engage targets within established safety parameters. What about Apaches? SAM sites on both ridge lines, sir. Too high risk without ASEED. Suppression of enemy air defenses would take time they didn't have. Alex watched Sanderson's face as he processed the situation. For the first time, she saw doubt in his expression. SEAL team is reporting ammunition at critical levels, another officer announced. Estimate 30 minutes before they're overrun. The room fell silent as the implications became clear. Without air support and with reinforcements too far away, 381 Americans were going to die in that valley. Alex stepped forward. Sir, the A-10 can provide effective support in this scenario. All eyes turned to her. Sanderson's expression hardened. Captain Harrington, this is not the time for, sir, she interrupted. I've developed and tested attack profiles specifically for this terrain. The A-10's GAU-8 can place fire within 25 meters of friendly forces if approached from the correct vectors. She moved to the tactical display, pointing to specific features. These three ridgelines create unique approach corridors that allow for precision engagement while maintaining necessary safety margins. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, standing beside Sanderson, studied the display. Colonel, perhaps we should consider Captain Harrington's approach. The situation is deteriorating rapidly. Sanderson shook his head. The rules of engagement are clear. 100 meters minimum distance. We cannot risk friendly fire casualties on top of what we're already facing. With respect, sir, Alex persisted, we're not talking about risk. We're talking about certainty. Without close air support, those men will die. All of them. And if your precision engagement is off by a few meters, you'll kill the very men you're trying to save. Sanderson's voice was ice. The answer is no, Captain. We will follow established protocols, even if those protocols guarantee failure, especially then. Sanderson turned away dismissively. Report to Major Peterson for assignment to the logistics coordination team. We'll need to prepare for casualty processing. Alex stood motionless, processing what she just heard. Casualty processing. They were already writing off 381 Americans. As she left the TOC, her mind raced through calculations. 10 minutes to prepare an A-10, 12 minutes to reach the valley. That left a razor-thin window where she might still make a difference. In the corridor, she nearly collided with Iron Bill Blackwood. They've walked right into it, haven't they? The older officer asked quietly. Exactly as predicted, Alex confirmed. Sanderson won't authorize close air support. Iron Bill's weathered face showed no surprise. And what are you going to do about it, Alex? The question hung between them, laden with implication. Both knew what Alex was considering. Both knew the consequences. What would my father have done? She asked, though she already knew the answer. He would have remembered his oath, Iron Bill replied, to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, to bear true faith and allegiance to the same, to obey the orders of the President and the officers appointed over him. He paused meaningfully, and to well and faithfully discharge the duties of his office. Sometimes those duties conflict with orders. Sometimes they do. Iron Bill placed a hand on her shoulder. Your father once told me that in those moments you don't choose between right and wrong. You choose between different kinds of right and accept the consequences of your choice. Alex nodded slowly, decision crystallizing. I need to write something down, just in case. Iron Bill understood immediately. Do what you need to do, Captain. I'll make sure Sarah has your bird ready. As they parted ways, Alex returned to her quarters and wrote a single paragraph on Air Force letterhead. If you're reading this, I acted because 381 Americans were dying while paperwork argued with itself. I accept full responsibility for my actions and any consequences thereof. I do not regret upholding my oath to protect American lives to the best of my ability, even when doing so required disobeying a direct order. Some prices are worth paying. She signed and dated the letter, placed it in her desk drawer, then headed for the flight line with calm purpose. Every step carried the weight of generations of service, duty, and the terrible burden of choice. In the distance, she could see Sarah Wilson already preparing A-10C 80-2794 flight. The Warthog waited on the tarmac, its shark-mouth paint scheme seeming to grin with anticipation. The time for preparation had ended. The moment for action had arrived. 381 lives now depended on her willingness to risk everything, her career, her freedom, perhaps even her life, to do what doctrine said couldn't be done. In her mind, her father's voice spoke one last time. The difference between the impossible and the possible lies in a person's determination. Captain Alexander Harrington was about to redefine possible. The desert sun beat down on Kandahar Air Base as Captain Alexandra Harrington strode toward her A-10 Warthog. Each step carried the weight of decision, each breath drawn with the calm certainty of someone who had crossed an invisible line and would not turn back. Tech Sergeant Sarah Wilson waited beside the aircraft, her expression a mixture of concern and determination. Full ordnance load, Sarah reported quietly. Gun drum at 100%, all Mavericks checked and ready. ECM suite updated with the latest threat profiles. Alex nodded, conducting her own visual inspection of the massive 30mm GAU-8A cannon that formed the aircraft's lethal core. Full tank. Topped off, you've got about 3 hours of loiter time depending on what kind of dance you're planning. Their eyes met, the unspoken understanding hanging between them. Sarah knew exactly what Alex was preparing to do. She had readied the aircraft without authorization, making herself an accomplice to whatever came next. You don't have to be part of this, Alex said softly. Sarah's jaw tightened. My brother is a SEAL captain. Not in that valley today, but it could have been him. I'm exactly where I need to be. Alex squeezed her shoulder, then climbed the ladder to the cockpit. The familiar seat embraced her as she strapped in and began the pre-flight sequence with practiced efficiency. Each switch, each gauge, each system check performed with the precision born of thousands of hours in the air. Through the canopy, she could see Iron Bill Blackwood watching from the edge of the tarmac, his stance military straight despite his years. He offered no salute, no wave, no visible encouragement. He simply stood witness to a moment of decision that echoed across generations of warriors. As the twin engines growled to life, Alex keyed her radio to the tower frequency. Kandahar Tower, Thunderbolt 7, requesting immediate takeoff. A confused pause followed. Thunderbolt 7, we show no flight plan filed. Please confirm mission designation. Alex took a deep breath. This was the first of many lines she would cross today. Tower, this is an emergency combat sortie. 381 American personnel are about to be overrun in the Korengal Valley. Request immediate clearance for takeoff. Another pause longer this time. Alex could imagine the confusion in the tower, the hurried calls to command, the realization that a pilot was attempting to launch without authorization. Finally, the radio crackled. Thunderbolt 7, hold position. We are consulting with command. Alex's hand tightened on the throttle. Every second spent waiting was another second. 381 Americans moved closer to death. Command would undoubtedly order her to stand down. Colonel Sanderson would have her arrested, her career ended. None of that mattered now. Tower, Thunderbolt 7 is rolling. She advanced the throttles, feeling the Warthog shudder as it began moving down the taxiway toward the runway. The radio exploded with urgent commands. Thunderbolt 7, you are not cleared for takeoff. Captain Harrington, stand down immediately. This is a direct order. Alex switched to the emergency guard frequency that all aircraft monitored. Any station, this is Thunderbolt 7 departing Kandahar. Inbound Korengal Valley. 381 Americans about to be overrun. Breaking rules to save them. Wheels up at 14:23 hours. The A-10 accelerated down the runway, lifting smoothly into the Afghan sky at precisely 2:23 in the afternoon. As the landing gear retracted with a solid thunk, Alex felt an unexpected calm settle over her. The die was cast. There was only forward now. She banked the aircraft toward the mountains, setting course for the Korengal Valley. The tactical display showed the dire situation unfolding 45 miles ahead. The radio continued to demand her return, Colonel Sanderson's voice particularly strident among the chorus, ordering her back to base. With calm deliberation, Alex turned the command frequency to minimum volume and focused on the mission frequencies where the SEALs would be coordinating their desperate defense. The voice of the SEAL ground commander designated Trident Actual came through clearly, his cadence professional, but tension evident in every word. All units conserve ammunition. Priority targets only. Maintain perimeter integrity at all costs. Alex keyed her microphone. Trident Actual, Thunderbolt 7, inbound your position. 12 minutes out. Mark your positions for close air support. A moment of stunned silence followed. Then, Thunderbolt 7 confirmed danger close authorization. We have tangos as close as 25 meters to our position. I'm authorized to save Americans, Alex replied simply. Designate your most pressing threat axis. As the jagged mountains grew larger in her windscreen, Alex reviewed the attack profiles she had memorized during countless simulator sessions. The Korengal Valley was notorious among pilots, a narrow gash in the earth with steep ridge lines, creating treacherous wind patterns and limited approach vectors. Today, those same features would provide the concealment she needed to deliver precise fire support at distances doctrine deemed impossible. The valley opened beneath her aircraft, revealing the grim tableau exactly as intelligence had reported. 3 ridgelines formed interlocking fields of fire down into a natural bowl where the SEAL teams had been trapped. Muzzle flashes sparked along the eastern ridge, heavy machine guns chewing into the American position. Thunderbolt 7, this is Trident Actual. East Ridge is priority. Heavy machine guns pinning our medical evacuation team. We've marked our perimeter with IR strobes. Through her targeting pod, Alex could see the infrared markers defining the American position. Just beyond them, perhaps 30 meters away, she identified the enemy gun emplacements. According to every air support manual, every training program, and every safety protocol engaging targets, this close to friendly forces was impossible. Alex had spent months proving otherwise. Copy, Trident. I have visual on enemy positions and your strobes. First pass will be East Ridge. Danger close. She rolled the aircraft into a steep dive, lining up her approach to use the ridge itself as a backstop for any rounds that might miss their target. The heads-up display projected firing solutions based on speed angle and wind conditions. Alex made micro-adjustments compensating for factors the computer couldn't fully account for. At precisely the right moment she pressed the trigger, feeling the massive GAU-8A cannon rumble to life. She held it for exactly 2 seconds, watching as 30mm depleted uranium rounds tore into the ridgeline, with surgical precision obliterating the machine gun position in a cloud of dust and debris. Immediately, she pulled up and rolled right, denying any potential anti-aircraft gunners a clean shot at her aircraft. "Good effect on target," came the SEAL commander's voice, a new note of hope evident. East Ridge MG is silent. In the Tactical Operations Center at Kandahar, all eyes were fixed on the live feed from reconnaissance drones observing the battle. Colonel Sanderson stood rigid with fury and disbelief as he watched Captain Harrington's A-10 performing maneuvers that violated every safety protocol in the book. "Get her on the radio," he ordered for the 3rd time. "Tell her to return to base immediately." The communications officer swallowed nervously. "Sir, she's acknowledged receipt, but continues operations." Lieutenant Colonel Hayes from the Inspector General's office stood nearby, his expression unreadable, as he observed both the battle unfolding on screen and the command crisis developing in the TOC. "Sir, a tactical analyst interrupted. Thunderbolt 7 just placed effective fire within 30 meters of friendly positions. No friendly casualties reported." Sanderson's face reddened. "That's well inside minimum safe distance. She's endangering those men with this cowboy stunt." Major Chen, who had been monitoring the SEAL team's communications, looked up from his console. "Sir, with respect, the SEAL commander is specifically requesting continued support from Thunderbolt 7. They report her fire is exactly where needed." Hayes finally spoke, his voice measured. "Colonel, it appears Captain Harrington has developed a technique for precision danger-close support that our doctrine doesn't account for." "What she's developed is a court-martial offense," Sanderson snapped. "The moment she lands, she'll be placed under arrest." Hayes studied the tactical display thoughtfully. "Perhaps, but first, let's see if she brings those men home alive." Back in the valley, Alex completed her 2nd attack run, neutralizing a mortar position on the northern slope that had been dropping rounds dangerously close to the SEAL medical station. The Warthog responded to her commands like an extension of her body, performing maneuvers that pushed the limits of the airframe but stayed just within the envelope of what was physically possible. Thunderbolt 7 Western Ridge has a heavy concentration of fighters moving to flank our position. Trident Actual called, 75 meters from our western perimeter. 75 meters was where jets got people killed. It was also where the A-10 Warthog and the right hands could perform miracles. Copy Trident, rolling in from northwest to southeast, marking your western perimeter. Affirm, IR strobes are active. Alex banked the aircraft into a steep slice, approaching from an angle that would use the ridge itself to contain any overshooting rounds. She lined her sights just below a rock outcropping where enemy fighters were gathering for an assault and pressed the trigger for a precisely calculated half-second burst. The 30mm round stitched a straight line between the blue strobes marking friendly forces and the muzzle flashes of enemy weapons. The effect was immediate. All movement on that section of ridge ceased. For a brief moment, the entire valley seemed to pause as combatants on both sides processed what they had just witnessed. An A-10 had placed effective fire inside a zone that all military doctrine declared untouchable. The radio crackled with Colonel Sanderson's voice breaking through the mission frequencies. "Thunderbolt 7, this is Kandahar Actual. Return to base immediately. You are not authorized for this engagement. Repeat, return to base immediately." Alex calmly switched to another frequency, leaving only the tactical communications active. She had moved beyond permission, beyond career consequences. There was only the mission now, the 381 lives depending on her skill, courage, and willingness to break rules that had become death sentences. "Trident Actual, I'm rolling east again," she transmitted, ignoring Sanderson's orders completely. "Designate your next priority target." The SEAL commander's voice had taken on new energy. "Thunderbolt 7, we have a SAM site on the southern spur. It's preventing our QRF helicopters from approaching." "Copy that. Moving to engage." Alex swung the aircraft around, identifying the surface-to-air missile site through her targeting pod. This target called for different ordnance. She selected a Maverick missile locked onto the heat signature of the SAM launcher and released. The missile streaked toward its target, impacting with a satisfying explosion that sent debris scattering across the mountainside. Immediately, she dipped the Warthog behind a ridgeline to break radar lock from the second SAM site she knew would be tracking her. The tactic worked. Missile warning indicators remained silent as she used the terrain to mask her approach for the next attack run. In the Tactical Operations Center there, the mood had shifted dramatically. What had begun as outrage at Captain Harrington's insubordination was evolving into stunned appreciation of her effectiveness. The tactical displays showed enemy positions being systematically neutralized with precision that defied conventional understanding of close air support limitations. Sir, the Major Chen reported, 16 lead is on station observing Thunderbolt 7. He reports she's placing rounds inside 25 meters of friendlies. Says it's either suicidal or surgical. So far, it appears to be surgical. The live feed showed Alex's A-10 executing a series of attack runs that seemed to defy physics, approaching from angles no training manual recommended, delivering fire with precision no simulator predicted possible. She's opening a corridor, Lieutenant Colonel Hayes observed, pointing to the pattern of strikes. Look at the southeastern quadrant. Every strike is progressively clearing a path toward that ridgefold. Sanderson studied the display with grudging reassessment. The A-10 was indeed creating an escape route where none had existed before, systematically eliminating enemy positions that controlled key terrain. Hayes turned to Sanderson. Colonel, whatever Captain Harrington's procedural violations, she's the only asset currently effective in that battle space. I strongly recommend supporting her efforts rather than impeding them. From the communications station, urgent reports flowed in from the SEAL commander. The tide was turning. Under the protective umbrella of Alex's precision strikes, the pinned-down forces were beginning to maneuver, shifting from a static defense to coordinated movement toward the corridor she was creating. A Pentagon legal officer who had been observing the operation stepped forward. Colonel, I should remind you that Captain Harrington has violated direct orders and endangered friendly forces with non-standard attack profiles. Regulations require immediate disciplinary action. Morrison, a veteran operations officer, pointed at the tactical display. She's the only thing keeping those men alive right now. Support her or start writing the eulogies. Sanderson stood at the crossroads of career and conscience, protocol and pragmatism. After a long moment, he made his choice. Open all support channels to Thunderbolt 7, he ordered. Give her everything she needs, real-time intelligence, countermeasure support, tanker coordination. If she's going to pull this off, she won't do it alone. In the valley, Alex continued her deadly ballet between the ridgelines, neutralizing enemy positions with mathematical precision. The cockpit was hot sweat soaking her flight suit as she maintained absolute concentration on each approach. Each weapon release, each split-second decision that meant life or death for the men below. Thunderbolt 7, this is Kandahar Actual, a new voice said calmly. We are with you. All assets are at your disposal. Guide us. Alex recognized Sanderson's voice, noted the change in tone, but maintained her focus on the immediate tactical situation. The only voices that mattered were the ones on the ground. Trident Actual, continue movement through the western corridor. I'm staying on your shoulder. The SEAL commander acknowledged, directing his teams to move in bounds, while Alex kept the high ground suppressed. 3 teams at a time advanced, while others provided cover fire, a coordinated dance of movement that slowly extracted the Americans from what had been a killing zone just 30 minutes earlier. Alex transformed the valley into a sequence of micro-battles she could win in seconds. A pickup truck with a mounted heavy machine gun appeared on the high right flank, too fleeting a target for a missile too small for rockets. She dipped the aircraft, lined up the targeting pipper on the vehicle's hood, and tapped the trigger. The truck folded in on itself, the gunner disappearing in a cloud of dust and debris. West High is cold, she called. Move on the east spur. An RPG team attempted to set up an ambush position ahead of the advancing SEALs. Alex spotted the muzzle flash of a test shot immediately rolling in and delivering a half-second burst that neutralized the threat before it could target the Americans below. The SEALs advanced by bounds, 3 teams, then 4, then all of them, flowing like water, finding gravity's path through the mountains. With each movement, Alex placed 30-millimeter fire exactly where it created a window of safety for the next advance. In the Tactical Operations Center, the atmosphere had transformed from crisis management to focused support. Intelligence analysts tracked enemy movements, predicting likely ambush positions and relaying them to Alex. Communications specialists ensured clear channels between all elements. Air controllers coordinated other assets to establish a broader security perimeter. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes stood beside Colonel Sanderson, both men watching the tactical display with professional appreciation. "She's rewriting the book on close air support," Hayes observed quietly. Sanderson nodded, his earlier anger replaced by grudging respect. "If she survives to publish it." Back in the valley, the SEAL teams had reached a natural fold in the western ridge, the extraction point Alex had identified through her terrain analysis months earlier. It was a shallow depression, invisible from most angles, providing natural cover from direct fire, while offering access to a wider canyon where helicopters could approach. "Thunderbolt 7, we're at the LZ fold," the SEAL commander reported, his voice steadier now. "Two enemy positions still have eyes on us." "Paint one," Alex directed. An infrared laser from the ground marked a rocky outcrop where enemy fighters were attempting to establish a firing position overlooking the extraction zone. Alex executed a precise attack run, her cannon erasing the threat in a cloud of dust. "Paint two." The second position received the same treatment, the ridge seemingly exhaling a cloud of pulverized rock as 30mm rounds transformed the enemy position into rubble. "LZ is workable. Trident actual confirmed. Request rotors." "Rotors inbound," came the response from Kandahar. "Chalks in 3 minutes." 3 minutes was an eternity in combat. If the ridges reawakened with enemy fire, the extraction could still fail catastrophically. Alex pushed out to the perimeter, hunting for any threat with line of sight to the landing zone. Two muzzle flashes betrayed a machine gun team in a stand of rocks overlooking the LZ. Without hesitation, she executed a diagonal strafing run, her cannon's rounds walking across the position like a zipper closing across stone. The flashes disappeared. "Chalk 1 is touching down," reported the helicopter pilot. "Beginning loadout." The first massive CH-47 Chinook helicopter descended into the fold-brown dust, billowing as it settled onto the uneven terrain. SEAL teams moved with disciplined urgency, loading wounded first, then essential equipment, then combat personnel. "Chalk 1 lifting, taking first stick aboard," came the update. "Chalk 2 inbound." Another Chinook approached, navigating through the narrow corridor Alex had cleared of anti-aircraft threats. This was the most vulnerable moment of the operation: aircraft on the ground, troops in transition, everyone exposed if even one enemy position remained operational. Alex scanned ridgelines methodically, her eyes constantly moving, seeking any sign of threat. Movement caught her attention, a PKM machine gun team shifting positions, trying to establish a firing solution on the vulnerable helicopters. 3 precise rounds from her cannon ended their attempt. "Chalk 2 lifting. We're green." A third helicopter risked the approach, settling heavily into the improvised landing zone. The remaining SEALs moved toward it with professional urgency, maintaining security even in extraction. Without warning, Alex's threat warning system chirped urgently. A surface-to-air missile had locked onto her heat signature. A launch alert followed immediately. She was already moving, already low, already turning behind a ridge, when the missile sought her engine's heat and found only empty air and rock. The SAM detonated it harmlessly against the mountainside, but revealed a final threat that had remained hidden until now. Alex popped up from behind the ridge, identified the mobile launcher team, attempting to reposition, and ended that chapter with a short, merciless burst of 30mm fire. "Trident actual," she reported calmly. "Your last elements are on Chalk 3 and 4. We're almost out." Almost was still not complete. An enemy element made a desperate sprint toward the lip of the landing zone, hoping to bring direct fire on the final helicopter before it could lift off. Alex wrote a bright, lethal line between them and the LZ. The sprint ended in stillness. "Chalk 4 lifting," the air mission commander announced. "All personnel aboard. We are off deck." The very last Americans, the rear security element, boarded a smaller UH-60 Blackhawk that had risked the dangerous approach to ensure no one was left behind. Alex held her fire as they disappeared into the brown dust cloud of the helicopter's rotor wash, then made one final pass along the ridge. Not to kill, but to send a message to any watching enemy fighters. Not today. Not while I'm here. And then the valley was silent, save for the wind and settling dust. The radio carried only the sound of breathing and the professional cadence of pilots coordinating their exit from the battle space. The SEAL commander's voice came back on the frequency, clipped, informal, because some moments demand ceremony. "Thunderbolt 7, be advised, 381 souls accounted for. 0 friendly KIA during exfil. We owe you our lives." Copy, Alex replied simply, allowing herself the first deep breath since taking off. She maintained a protective orbit, flying lazy figure-8 patterns high above the helicopter formation until they were safely beyond the mountain's reach. Only then did she turn her aircraft toward Kandahar, taking stock of her situation. Fuel was adequate for return. One Maverick missile remained on her wing. The 30mm cannon had expended nearly two-thirds of its ammunition. Chaff and flare countermeasures were critically low. The aircraft had sustained minor damage from small arms fire, but all systems functioned within parameters. Most surprisingly, her hands were steady on the controls, her mind clear and focused. What should have been the most stressful flight of her career had instead become the purest expression of everything she had trained for. Alex switched the command net back on, hearing the chatter of a military bureaucracy struggling to process what had just occurred. "Kandahar Thunderbolt 7 returning to base," she transmitted formally. A brief silence followed, then Colonel Sanderson's controlled, unreadable voice. "Thunderbolt 7, you are cleared direct. Winds 270 at 8 knots. The runway stretched ahead like a question as Alex aligned her aircraft for landing. The touchdown was smooth, the taxi deliberate, the engine shut down, by the book. Every movement precise, professional, as though this were just another training flight, rather than an act of calculated insubordination that had saved 381 lives. She pulled the canopy release and let the base's heat and noise flood in. Through her sweat-stained visor, she saw something unexpected. The flight line was lined with people. Maintenance crews, ammunition specialists, medical personnel, pilots, security forces, even the mess hall staff had emerged to witness her return. But this wasn't a celebration or a protest. It was something older, more fundamental, respect in its raw, unfiltered form. Alex climbed down from the cockpit, removing her helmet as her boots touched the tarmac. Colonel Sanderson waited nearby, flanked by Lieutenant Colonel Hayes and several senior officers. She approached and stood at attention, back straight, eyes forward, prepared for whatever consequences awaited. "Captain Harrington," Sanderson began, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent ramp, "you departed without authorization. You violated direct orders. You engaged targets at ranges that exceed every safety parameter we've established." "Yes, sir," she acknowledged. "You also," he continued, his tone shifting slightly, "brought home 381 Americans without a single friendly casualty during the extraction." Sanderson took a measured breath, then asked the question no one had expected. "Captain Harrington, can you teach others to do what you did today?" The question hung in the air, pregnant with implication. This wasn't the beginning of court-martial proceedings. It was the recognition that something fundamental had changed in the art of close air support. "Yes, sir," Alex answered without hesitation. "I can teach it." "Good," Sanderson nodded, "because we're going to document exactly how you did that so the next pilot doesn't have to learn it at 3 in the morning in a locked simulator." The formal proceedings came later, of course. Statements were taken, timelines constructed, questions asked to determine whether Alex had gambled recklessly or calculated precisely. She answered with mathematics, map references, memory, and methodology, technique over theatrics. She didn't justify, she explained. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes led much of the questioning, probing not for wrongdoing, but for understanding. His final assessment cut to the heart of the matter. "You broke procedure," he acknowledged, "but your procedure was better for the problem you faced. We will not make a habit of rewarding insubordination, but we will make a habit of fixing doctrine when it fails to address battlefield realities." There was no talk of medals, not yet, just work. The work of understanding what Alex had accomplished and how to incorporate those lessons into Air Force doctrine without encouraging every pilot to ignore rules of engagement when they disagreed with them. In the aftermath, what impressed senior officers most wasn't Alex's flying skill, though that had been exceptional. It was her preparation, the months of study, simulation, and analysis that had allowed her to act decisively when the moment demanded it. The SEAL commander visited Kandahar 3 days later, his weathered face still showing the strain of the near disaster in the Korangal. He requested a private meeting with Alex, away from the officers still debating the policy implications of her actions. "I won't pretend to understand how you did what you did," he told her without preamble. "The angles, the math, the physics, that's your world. But I know what I saw. You put rounds where nobody else would dare try, exactly where we needed them. exactly when we needed them. He placed a small object on the table between them, a seal-trident insignia, the elite special warfare badge that marked the pinnacle of naval special operations qualification. This isn't authorized. You can't wear it. Officially, I never gave it to you. A rare smile crossed his face. But 381 of us are alive because you were willing to risk everything when the World Book said we were already dead. As far as we're concerned, that makes you one of us. Alex accepted the token with the gravity it deserved, understanding that some recognitions transcend official commendations. I was just doing my job, she said quietly. No. The SEAL shook his head emphatically. Your job was to follow orders and preserve your career. What you did was something else entirely. Something better. As he turned to leave, he added, We have been most saying the only easy day was yesterday. After what you did, I think we need to add, and the impossible day was the one Captain Harrington showed up. That evening alone in her quarters, Alex finally allowed the emotional weight of everything to settle over her. She had risked her career, her freedom, perhaps even her life. She had defied orders, violated safety protocols, and broken nearly every rule governing close air support operations. And in doing so, she had fulfilled the most sacred obligation of her oath to protect American lives with every skill and capacity at her disposal. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Iron Bill Blackwood standing there, his weathered face uncharacteristically solemn. Walk with me, he said simply. They strolled in silence to the far edge of the flight line, where Alex's A-10 sat in the fading light maintenance crews still swarming over it, documenting every system for the after-action analysis. Your father would be proud, Iron Bill finally said, his voice rough with emotion. Not just of what you did, but of how you did it. Prepared, calculated, deliberate. I had a good teacher, Alex replied, glancing at the older officer. Two of them, actually. Iron Bill nodded, understanding her reference to both himself and her father. James always said the A-10 was the last honest aircraft the Air Force ever built. No stealth, no supersonic speed, no fancy electronics package. Just a flying gun designed to protect ground troops built around a pilot willing to fly low and slow into the worst places on Earth. They watched as the maintenance crew chief directed the final inspections of the day the aircraft's distinctive silhouette stark against the darkening sky. They're going to change things because of what you did today, Iron Bill continued. Doctrine training, rules of engagement, it's already starting. Hayes is briefing the Pentagon tomorrow. Sanderson is drafting new tactical directives. Will it be enough, Alex asked? Or will the next pilot face the same choice I did? That's the question that matters, isn't it? The older officer gazed thoughtfully at the distant mountains where 381 men had nearly died. Systems resist change, Alex. They're designed to, but sometimes someone comes along who forces the issue by proving the impossible isn't. As darkness settled over the base, the maintenance crews finished their work and departed, leaving the A-10 standing alone on the tarmac. In the dim light of distant floodlights, the aircraft's shark-mouthed paint scheme seemed to smile with satisfaction. What happens tomorrow? Alex asked, referring to the continuing investigation and potential disciplinary actions still hanging over her. Iron Bill's answer was philosophical rather than practical. Tomorrow, 381 Americans wake up alive because you chose people over procedure. Tomorrow, someone in the Pentagon reads Hayes' report and realizes our doctrine needs to evolve. Tomorrow, a junior pilot somewhere hears what happened and starts asking questions about the rules we've been teaching. He turned to face her directly. The most important thing that happens tomorrow, though, is that you get back in that cockpit and keep flying. Because what you did wasn't a fluke or a desperate gamble. It was the culmination of preparation meeting opportunity. The Air Force needs that lesson more than it needs to punish you for breaking rules that were already broken. As they walked back toward the barracks, Iron Bill added one final thought. Your father used to say that flying wasn't about defying gravity. It was about working with physics to do what seemed impossible. I think the same applies to military doctrine. You didn't defy it today. You showed us how to make it work better. Alex nodded, finding unexpected peace in the comparison. She had entered that valley prepared to sacrifice her career for 381 lives. Instead, she might have found a way to transform both. The investigation would continue. Questions would be asked. Procedures would be reviewed. But for tonight, at least the victory was complete. 81. Americans were alive, and the impossible had been proven merely difficult. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Tonight was for honoring the mission accomplished and the lives preserved when a pilot refused to accept that some situations were beyond saving. The difference between the impossible and the possible, Alex murmured her father's words again, lies in a person's determination. Iron Bill smiled, hearing the echo of his old friend's voice in his daughter's words. James would have added one thing to that. What's that? That the difference between a good pilot and a great one is knowing which impossible things are worth attempting. They parted ways at Alex's quarters, the older officer offering a rare formal salute that acknowledged something beyond rank respect between warriors who understood that rules existed to preserve life, not prevent its salvation. Inside her room, Alex finally allowed exhaustion to claim her, collapsing onto her bunk, still in her flight suit. As consciousness faded, she felt a presence that might have been memory, might have been imagination, but brought comfort, nonetheless, her father's spirit watching over the daughter who had completed the mission he had begun a generation earlier. 381 souls saved, 0 friendly casualties during extraction, the impossible made possible through preparation skill and the courage to act when rules said action was forbidden. In the darkness of her quarters, Captain Alexandra Harrington slept the dreamless sleep of someone who had found her true purpose in the skies over Afghanistan, not as a rule breaker, but as a guardian who understood that sometimes saving lives required drawing new lines on old maps. Dawn broke over Kandahar Air Base with the harsh clarity particular to desert mornings. Captain Alexandra Harrington stood on the flight line watching the sun illuminate the jagged mountains where just 24 hours earlier she had rewritten the rules of close air support and saved 381 American lives. Her A-10 Warthog sat nearby its battle-scarred frame, surrounded by maintenance crews documenting every bullet hole, every system status, every aspect of the aircraft that had performed what doctrine deemed impossible. The plane seemed almost alive in the golden light, its shark-mouthed nose art grinning with satisfaction at a mission well executed. "They've been at it all night," said Sarah Wilson, appearing beside Alex. The maintenance sergeant's eyes were rimmed with exhaustion, but carried a fierce pride. "Brass wants every detail. How much ammunition you expended, fuel consumption rates, stress indicators on the airframe during your maneuvers." Alex nodded. "They're trying to understand what happened." "What happened is you did something they said couldn't be done." Sarah handed Alex a steaming cup of coffee. "The crew chiefs are calling it the Harrington Run already. It'll be in the unofficial training syllabus by next week." Before Alex could respond, a staff car pulled up nearby. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes emerged, his crisp uniform and alert demeanor, suggesting he, unlike most on base, had managed some sleep. "Captain Harrington," he called, "walk with me, please." Sarah squeezed Alex's arm supportively before retreating to her maintenance duties. Alex fell in beside Hayes as he led her away from the bustle of the flight line. "The after-action review begins in 1 hour," Hayes said without preamble. "Before that happens, I wanted to speak with you privately." "Am I being court-martialed, sir?" Alex asked directly. Hayes considered her for a moment. That was certainly the initial recommendation. "Colonel Sanderson was emphatic about it last night. And now we have 381 American servicemen alive who by all conventional assessments should be dead or captured. We have a SEAL commander calling it the most precise close air support he's witnessed in 20 years of special operations. And we have gun camera footage showing attack runs that our current training says are impossible." They stopped at a quiet spot overlooking the base, the mountains looming in the distance. "The Pentagon is very interested in understanding exactly what you did and how you did it," Hayes continued, "particularly the techniques you developed for danger-close fire support inside our established safety parameters." Alex felt a cautious optimism begin to replace the resignation that had settled over her since landing. Does that mean the Air Force is reconsidering the 100-meter rule? "It means," Hayes said carefully, "that when presented with clear evidence that our doctrine has gaps, the military can adapt. Slowly, reluctantly, with endless committees and paperwork, but it can adapt." He turned to face her directly. "The SEAL commander submitted his after-action report at 0300 this morning. He credited your actions as the sole reason his men survived. The video evidence supports his assessment. Those two factors have transformed this from a clear case of insubordination to something more complex. A fortunate case of insubordination, Alex suggested. Hayes almost smiled. Let's call it tactical innovation under crisis conditions. It sounds better in reports. What happens now, sir? Now you go into that review and explain in exhaustive detail exactly how you did what you did. Not why you disobeyed orders. Everyone understands your motivations. We need to know the how. The angles of attack, the timing of weapon release, the calculations you made that allowed 30mm rounds to impact within 30 meters of friendly forces without a single friendly casualty. He checked his watch. Colonel Sanderson will be present. So will representatives from Air Combat Command and Special Operations Command. They're not there to punish you, Captain. They're there to learn. As they walked back toward headquarters, Hayes added, by the way, the JCS chairman was briefed on the operation at 0500. His first question was whether your procedures could be taught to other pilots. And what did you tell him? I told him we were about to find out. Sure. The briefing room fell silent as Alex concluded her presentation. For 2 hours, she had detailed the techniques she'd developed for precision, danger-close air support, the approach vectors, the timing calculations, the environmental factors, the aircraft-specific adjustments. Her hand-drawn diagrams and simulator data covered the walls, a testament to months of preparation for a contingency everyone else had deemed impossible. Colonel Sanderson sat at the center of the review panel, his expression unreadable, as he studied the flight path illustrations, showing how Alex had used terrain features to contain any potential ricochets or overshooting rounds. Beside him, General James Marshall from Air Combat Command made notes with methodical precision, occasionally asking for clarification on technical points. To summarize, Alex concluded, the A-10's GAU-8A cannon can deliver effective fire support within 25 meters of friendly forces under specific conditions. The key factors are precise knowledge of terrain, features exact, calculation of approach, angles, half-second trigger discipline, and extensive practice in simulation before attempting in combat. She stood at attention awaiting questions. General Marshall spoke first. Captain Harrington, your analysis is impressive. You've clearly put hundreds of hours into developing these techniques. What concerns me is that you kept this work entirely to yourself until crisis forced your hand. With respect, sir, I didn't keep it to myself, Alex replied evenly. I submitted 3 formal reports outlining these findings. All were dismissed as theoretical and impractical. All eyes turned to Colonel Sanderson, who straightened in his chair. Those reports suggested modifications to established safety protocols that I deemed excessively risky, Sanderson acknowledged. Captain Harrington proposed reducing minimum engagement distances by 75%. Without practical demonstration, such proposals appeared reckless. And yet, Lieutenant Colonel Hayes observed, when practically demonstrated, those same techniques saved 381 lives. Sanderson's jaw tightened momentarily, then relaxed. Yes, they did. He looked directly at Alex for the first time since the review began. I was wrong about the techniques, Captain. Not about the chain of command, but about the techniques. The admission hung in the air, a rare concession from a senior officer to a junior one. General Marshall broke the silence. The question before us isn't whether Captain Harrington violated the chain of command. She did unquestionably. The question is whether what she discovered is valuable enough to warrant integration into our doctrine, despite how it was demonstrated. He turned to face the room. I've reviewed the gun camera footage and the SEAL team's after-action reports. I've studied Captain Harrington's methodology. My assessment is that we're looking at a significant advancement in close air support capability that could save countless lives in future operations. Marshall looked back at Alex. Captain, are you confident these techniques can be taught to other A-10 pilots? Yes, sir, she answered without hesitation. With proper training and simulation, any qualified A-10 pilot can learn these methods. The key is understanding that the safety parameters we've been using were established for conventional warfare scenarios, not the close quarters counterinsurgency operations we're currently conducting. The general nodded thoughtfully. Colonel Sanderson, your command has been selected to develop a new tactical directive incorporating Captain Harrington's findings. You'll establish a close air support development unit with the captain as your technical lead. Sanderson blinked in surprise. Sir, the directive comes directly from the Air Combat Commander, Marshall said firmly. The lives saved yesterday have drawn attention at the highest levels. We need this capability formalized, documented, and implemented across the A-10 fleet as quickly as possible. He closed his folder decisively. As for the chain of command issues, Colonel Sanderson will determine appropriate administrative action that balances the seriousness of the infraction against the value of the outcome. I trust his judgment to find that balance. With that, the general stood, signaling the end of the review. As the room cleared, Sanderson remained seated, studying the materials Alex had presented. She stood at attention, waiting for his decision regarding her fate. When they were alone, Sanderson finally spoke. You placed me in an impossible position, Captain. You violated direct orders and launched without authorization, by any standard measure that warrants severe disciplinary action. Yes, sir, Alex acknowledged. Yet those same actions saved hundreds of lives and revealed a critical gap in our tactical doctrine. He sighed heavily. When I first arrived in this theater, I dismissed your concerns about our close air support protocols. I saw risk where I should have seen preparation. That's on me, sir, Alex said quietly. And I was out of my lane, Sanderson admitted. That's on me. He stood gathering his papers. So perhaps we redraw the lanes where they should have been all along. It was the closest thing to peace either of them would find in this complex situation. Not quite forgiveness, not quite vindication, but a professional acknowledgement that both had lessons to learn. Report to my office at 0800 tomorrow, Sanderson instructed. We'll begin establishing the development unit. Your official reprimand for unauthorized launch will be placed in your file alongside a commendation for exceptional airmanship and courage under fire. Thank you, sir. As Sanderson reached the door, he paused. One question, Captain. When you decided to launch knowing the consequences, what was going through your mind? Alex considered carefully before answering. That some prices are worth paying, sir. My career for 381 lives seemed like a fair exchange. Sanderson nodded slowly. Let's make sure the next pilot doesn't have to make that calculation. Good day, Captain. Sir. The following weeks unfolded with the peculiar intensity that follows watershed moments in military operations. The newly established Close Air Support Development Unit quickly became the center of innovation for the airbase, with pilots from multiple squadrons rotating through to learn the techniques Alex had pioneered. 6 months after the Korengal Valley operation, the unit had trained over 60 A-10 pilots in precision danger-close support methods, revised the tactical manual for close air support, and developed a comprehensive simulation program that allowed pilots to practice the techniques without risking lives. Alex moved through this period with single-minded focus, channeling her energy into ensuring that what had been discovered through crisis became standard capability through training. She taught from first principles, drilling pilots on terrain analysis, weapons effects, and the mathematics of precision. Read the ground like a book, she instructed during a classroom session. Every fold a word, every ridge a sentence, every valley a paragraph. If you can't recite it from 12 angles, you don't know it well enough. She emphasized trigger discipline above all else. Taps, not streams, became her mantra. Let dust be your smoke, not your blindfold. Kill the right nodes. The shooter that anchors a crossfire is worth 10 in the open. Her methods were uncompromising, her standards exacting. She showed clean demonstration tapes alongside ugly ones, highlighted successes and failures with equal emphasis, and remained unsentimental about both. There was no room for ego in work where mistakes cost lives. Pilots who had once smirked at her intensity now took detailed notes. Officers who had lectured her on protocol now asked questions about implementation. The Marines sent their forward air controllers. The Army sent their aviation representatives. Special operations sent men who had been in the valley that day to sit in the front row and annotate the lessons. An awards formation came and went with little fanfare. Quiet citations, a ribbon or two, nothing gaudy. The write-ups were careful where they needed to be and exact where they could. The official consequence on paper was a reprimand for unauthorized launch. The consequence in practice was responsibility. Real responsibility for transforming how America delivered air support to troops in contact. Colonel Sanderson found Alex by the simulator bay late one evening reviewing training footage with the meticulous attention that had become her trademark. The Pentagon has approved the new protocols, he announced without preamble. The 100-meter rule is now a guideline with context, not a commandment without exceptions. Your methods are being implemented across all A-10 squadrons by the end of the quarter. Alex nodded, allowing herself a moment of satisfaction. That will save lives, sir. It already has. Sanderson handed her a folder. After-action report from Helmand Province last week. Captain Reynolds used your techniques to support a Marine unit pinned down in a compound. 28 Americans walked away from what would have been a slaughter under the old protocols. Reynolds had been among the first pilots Alex trained, a skeptic, who became a convert after seeing the gun camera footage from the Korengal operation. I was wrong about you, Sanderson admitted, his usual formality softening slightly. I saw risk where there was preparation. That's on me. I was out of lane, Alex echoed their earlier conversation. That's on me. Then let's redraw the lanes where they should have been. It was the closest thing to peace either of them would find, but it was enough. As Sanderson turned to leave, he added, by the way, General Marshall wants the development unit's work formalized into a new training module for the A-10 schoolhouse. He's requested you PCS to Davis-Monthan next month to oversee implementation. Alex raised an eyebrow. Me, sir, working directly with the schoolhouse. Your techniques, your responsibility. Sanderson almost smiled. Besides, you've trained everyone here who's willing to listen. Time to spread the gospel to the next generation. After he left, Alex remained in the simulator bay contemplating this unexpected turn in her career. 6 months ago, she had been prepared to sacrifice everything to save lives in a distant valley. Now she was being sent to reshape how the Air Force trained its A-10 pilots. The difference, she realized, wasn't just in the outcome of that desperate mission. It was in how she had prepared for it methodically, scientifically, with hundreds of hours of study and practice before the moment of crisis arrived. Innovation born of preparation carried weight that mere improvisation could never achieve. An analyst had pinned the numbers on a wall because some truths needed physical form, 381 extracted, 0 friendly KIA during movement. People touched the paper when they walked past like a relic that required no prayer to convey its blessing. Alex avoided that hallway when she could not out of modesty, but out of accuracy. She knew better than most how easily the math could have rolled the other way. Skill mattered. So did timing, so did luck. So did the courage of men on the ground who refused to break under a sky that had initially told them no. The true victory wasn't just in the lives saved that day, it was in the lives that would be saved in future conflicts, because the system had, however, reluctantly learned and adapted. Commands that had once ignored Alex's analyses now sought her expertise on complex operational challenges. A border valley with winds that defied prediction. A city block with friendlies upstairs and hosties downstairs. A night extraction where infrared strobes failed. For each problem, she developed solutions grounded in physics, terrain, and the capabilities of the A-10 platform. She published checklists that reduced fratricide risk, trained techniques for reading patterns through thermal clutter, and established new methods for deconfliction when standard measures failed. It wasn't heroics. It was craft-made public expertise shared rather than hoarded innovation documented for those who would follow. 2 years after the Korengal Valley operation, Alex found herself addressing a class of new A-10 pilots at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. These young lieutenants had arrived wide-eyed and proud of their wings, eager to be told what mattered most in the complex art of close air support. Technology is a promise, not a plan, she told them, the same line she delivered to every class. The plan is you. Learn the ground, learn the gun, learn the people on the net. Then when a valley asks a question nobody wants to answer, you'll have one ready that keeps Americans alive. The pilots took notes with the seriousness of those who understood they weren't learning abstract concepts, but practical skills that would determine life or death in distant conflicts. Alex watched them, recognizing the same mixture of ambition and uncertainty she had felt at their age. After the lecture, a young female lieutenant approached, hesitating slightly before speaking. Ma'am, I just wanted to say, your Korengal mission is why I chose the A-10 track. They teach it at the academy now as a case study in moral courage and tactical innovation. Alex hadn't known her actions had become part of the curriculum. The thought was both gratifying and uncomfortable. They teach the techniques, I hope, not just the decision to launch. Both, ma'am, they emphasize that your preparation made the outcome possible. that you spent months developing the methods before the crisis ever happened. As the lieutenant departed, Alex reflected on how stories transform in the telling. What had been a desperate gamble to save lives was becoming something more in the military's collective memory, a watershed moment when doctrine evolved because reality demanded it. Later that day, Alex walked the flight line, running her hand along the titanium armor of an A-10 as if it were a living creature. Despite her new responsibilities as an instructor and doctrine developer, she maintained her flight status, logging hours in the cockpit each week. The connection between pilot and aircraft remained sacred to her, a bond that couldn't be replaced by simulators or theoretical knowledge. That evening, she returned to her office to find an envelope on her desk with no return address. Inside was a challenge coin bearing the SEAL Team 7 insignia and a handwritten note, 381 reasons to say thank you, Trident Actual. Alex added it to a simple wooden box containing similar tokens from men whose lives had intersected with hers. On that pivotal day, Patch's coins, brief notes of gratitude. She kept these private acknowledgments separate from her official commendations, never displaying them publicly, but drawing quiet strength from their presence. She never opened the box on days she flew. Some connections between past and present were too powerful to carry into the sky. 3 years after Korangal, Alex's innovations had become standard doctrine across the A-10 fleet. The Close Air Support Development Unit she had established continued its work, constantly refining techniques as operational environments evolved. The 100-meter rule had been officially replaced with a context-based assessment protocol that balanced risk against operational necessity. On a crisp autumn morning, Alex stood before a fresh class of A-10 pilots, conducting a practical demonstration of terrain-massed approaches for danger-close support. Her aircraft tail number 80-279, the same Warthog she had flown into the valley, waited on the tarmac, its shark-mouthed nose art freshly repainted, but its battle scars preserved as a testament to history. As she completed her pre-flight briefing, a gruff voice called from the back of the assembled group. "Captain Harrington, a moment of your time." Alex turned to find Iron Bill Blackwood approaching, still ramrod straight, despite having officially retired the previous year. The pilots parted respectfully, many recognizing the legendary figure who had advised 3 generations of A-10 drivers. "Colonel Blackwood," Alex greeted him with genuine pleasure. "I didn't know you were visiting base today." "Not an official visit," the older man replied. "Personal business." He glanced at the waiting pilots. "Mind if I steal the captain for a few minutes, gentlemen? I promise to return her in time for your demonstration." The class instructor nodded agreement, and Iron Bill led Alex to a quiet spot away from the flight line. "Retirement suits you," Alex observed. "You look well." "Civilian life is overrated," he grumbled, though his eyes betrayed his contentment. "But I didn't come here to discuss my golf game. I came to deliver something that's been waiting too long." From his jacket, he withdrew a small box covered in aged leather, its surface cracked and worn by decades of storage. "This belonged to your father. He asked me to keep it safe, to give it to you when the time was right." Alex accepted the box with surprise. "After all these years, why now?" "Because now you'll understand what it means." Iron Bill nodded toward the A-10s on the tarmac. "Your father believed the Warthog was the last honest aircraft the Air Force ever built. No stealth, no supersonic dash, just a flying gun designed to protect troops on the ground, piloted by someone willing to fly low and slow where others won't go." Alex opened the box carefully. Inside lay a pilot's chronograph watch, its face scratched but functional, its leather band cracked with age and use. Turning it over, she found an inscription on the back. "When lives hang in the balance, fly with your heart. J.H." He wore it on every combat mission, Iron Bill explained, including his last. "They recovered it intact when they found the wreckage. Your mother gave it to me for safekeeping until you were ready." Alex ran her thumb across the inscription, feeling a connection to her father more tangible than any photograph or story. "And you decided I'm ready now." Iron Bill smiled slightly. "I decided 3 years ago when you flew into that valley. But some lessons take time to fully appreciate. Now that you're teaching others, now that you've seen your innovations save lives beyond that one mission, now you understand what that watch really means. Which is that the most important instrument in any cockpit isn't the altimeter or the weapon system. It's the moral compass of the pilot. The older officer nodded toward the waiting class of aviators. You're not just teaching them angles of attack and trigger discipline, Alex. You're teaching them when to follow orders and when orders must yield to a higher duty. Alex carefully fastened the watch around her wrist, feeling its weight both physical and symbolic. Your father would be proud, Bill added, not just of what you did that day, but of what you've done since. Changing doctrine from within is harder than breaking rules in a crisis. It requires more courage, more persistence, more faith in the system's capacity to evolve. As they walked back toward the waiting class, a young crew chief approached, calling out from beside Alex's aircraft. Ma'am, pre-flight check's complete. She's ready when you are. Iron Bill chuckled. Something never change. The eternal optimism of youth before a combat sortie. This is just a training flight, Alex reminded him. There's no such thing as just training, not in your classes. Iron Bill's expression grew serious. These pilots will remember today's lesson when they're facing their own impossible valley someday. They'll hear your voice in their heads when doctrine and duty seem to conflict. He glanced at the aircraft, then back at Alex. That line chief has grease on his sleeve and integrity in his grin. He's right about one thing. What's that? It's good to know that if we ever get pinned down bad again, you've been where the map stops. And more importantly, you've taught others how to go there too. Alex smiled. The map never stops, Colonel. Sometimes someone just has to draw the next line. Iron Bill nodded in agreement. And that's the real lesson, isn't it? Not that one pilot broke rules, but that one pilot proved the rule beneath all others. When lives hang in the balance, skill married to courage can turn a tomb back into a road home. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the bombing range as Alex demonstrated the precision danger close techniques she had developed. The class watched with professional appreciation as she placed 30mm rounds exactly where intended, time after time, from angles conventional wisdom had once deemed impossible. After landing, she conducted a detailed debrief, answering questions with the patience of someone who understood that lives would depend on these lessons being thoroughly absorbed. Remember, she concluded, these techniques aren't about being reckless or cavalier with safety margins. They're about expanding our understanding of what's possible when necessity demands it. The 100-meter rule wasn't wrong, it was incomplete. It failed to account for aircraft capabilities, terrain features, and pilot proficiency in specific scenarios. A lieutenant raised his hand. Ma'am, how do we know when to apply these techniques versus following standard protocols? Good question. Alex considered carefully before answering. When lives are at stake and conventional approaches are failing, that's when you consider alternatives. But, and this is crucial, you only attempt what you've prepared for. What made Korengal possible wasn't desperate improvisation. It was months of study, simulation, and practice before the crisis ever happened. She touched her father's watch, drawing strength from its presence. Innovation without preparation is just recklessness. The goal isn't to create pilots who ignore rules. It's to create pilots who understand the physics and purpose behind those rules, who can make informed judgments when situations fall outside doctrinal parameters. As the class dispersed, Alex remained by the aircraft conducting her own post-flight inspection alongside the maintenance crew. Some habits never changed, regardless of rank or role. The hands-on connection to the machine remained as important to her as the theoretical knowledge she imparted to her students. The sun was setting when she finally returned to her office, the day's training complete. On her desk lay a folder containing deployment orders for several of her recent graduates. Young pilots heading to their first combat assignments, carrying the techniques and philosophy she had instilled. Would they remember the lessons when it mattered most? Would they recognize the difference between reckless disregard for protocol and necessary adaptation to reality? The questions had no immediate answers, but they were the right questions to ask, the ones that had guided her own journey from rulebook pilot to doctrine innovator. A knock at her door interrupted these reflections. A young airman stood at attention holding an envelope. Priority message from Pentagon, ma'am, hand-delivered. Alex accepted the envelope, waiting until the airman departed before opening it. Inside lay transfer orders. Effective immediately, she was being promoted to major and reassigned to Air Combat Command Headquarters to lead the development of a comprehensive doctrine revision for close air support operations in complex terrain. The orders were accompanied by a handwritten note from General Marshall. Time to institutionalize what you started. The Air Force is ready to redraw some maps. Alex sat back, absorbing the implications. What had begun as a desperate mission to save lives in one valley had evolved into something much larger, a fundamental reassessment of how the Air Force supported troops in contact. Her personal risk had become institutional progress, her individual innovation transforming into doctrinal evolution. She glanced at the small wooden box containing tokens from the men whose lives she had saved, then at her father's watch with its simple inscription. The circle felt complete somehow, a legacy honored and extended. As darkness fell over the base, she could hear the distant sound of aircraft engines. The next generation of pilots conducting night training, learning to navigate the complexities of air combat in an ever-evolving battlefield. Among them were pilots she had taught, carrying her lessons into operational theaters, where Americans would depend on their skill and judgment. The number still appeared occasionally in briefings and case studies, and in A-10 extracted zero friendly KIA during movement. But the true measurement of that day's impact couldn't be quantified so neatly. It lived in modified doctrines, updated training programs, and, most importantly, in lives saved by pilots who never had to make the impossible choice Alex had faced because the system had evolved to incorporate her innovations. 6 months later, Major Alexandra Harrington stood before a classroom at the Air Force Weapons School, addressing an elite group of instructors who would disseminate the new close air support doctrine throughout the service. The A-10 was designed with a simple philosophy, she explained. Put the pilot close enough to see the battle, arm them with weapons precise enough to make a difference, and build the aircraft tough enough to bring them home afterward. Everything we've developed builds on that foundation. She activated a simulation showing the Korengal Valley operation that had started it all. The audience watched with professional appreciation as the impossible became methodical, the desperate gamble revealed as calculated precision. The lesson isn't that rules should be broken, she emphasized as the simulation concluded. It's that doctrine must evolve when reality proves it incomplete. Our job is to prepare pilots for the valleys they haven't seen yet, to ensure they never have to choose between orders and lives, because we've built a system flexible enough to accommodate battlefield realities. After the presentation, a senior instructor approached. That was the mission that changed everything, wasn't it? The one they still talk about at SOCOM. Alex nodded. It was a catalyst, yes, but the real change came afterward, when the Air Force chose to learn from experience rather than punish innovation. That's the greater victory. I heard a story, when the instructor said carefully, that you have the number 381 inscribed inside your helmet. Is that true? Alex smiled slightly. Some reminders that we keep private, Colonel. They're not for display or discussion. He understood immediately, offering a respectful nod before departing. The truth was more nuanced than rumors suggested. Alex didn't need numerals inscribed anywhere to remember the lives at stake in her profession. What she carried instead was her father's watch, the chronograph that had accompanied him on his final mission, now accompanying her as she reshaped the doctrine he had once followed. Each time she checked it, she was reminded of both legacy and responsibility, the past that had shaped her and the future she was helping to create. A future where pilots wouldn't have to choose between rules and lives, because the rules themselves had evolved to embrace the full spectrum of combat realities. The years passed, missions came and went, but the legacy of that day in the Korengal Valley continued to influence military aviation doctrine. The Harrington protocols became standard curriculum at every level of Air Force training, from undergraduate pilot instruction through the weapons school. On a clear morning 5 years after the mission that changed everything now, Lieutenant Colonel Alexandra Harrington stood on the flight line at Bagram Air Base, watching a new generation of A-10 pilots prepare for combat sorties. Among them was Captain Jennifer Rivera, a young officer who had been one of Alex's first students at Davis-Monthan. Colonel Rivera greeted her, snapping a crisp salute. Didn't expect to see you in theater. Just passing through, Alex replied, returning the salute. Checking on implementation of the new CAS directive. How's it working in practical application? Saved lives last week, Rivera said simply. Taliban had a Marine unit pinned down in a compound near Sangin. Conventional approach would have been impossible due to terrain and proximity. We used your ridgeline containment technique, placed fire within 30 meters of friendlies. 27 Marines walked out who wouldn't have otherwise. Alex nodded satisfaction, warming her chest. This was the true measure of her work, not medals or promotions, but Americans returning home because doctrine had evolved to meet reality. The Marines sent this afterward, Rivera added, pulling a small carved eagle from her pocket. Their gunny said to give it to whoever taught me that crazy close-in stuff that shouldn't work but does. Alex smiled, declining the token with a shake of her head. That belongs to you, Captain. You flew the mission, you made the calculations, you pulled the trigger. The doctrine just gave you permission to use your judgment. As she walked away, Rivera called after her. Colonel, is it true what they say that you flew into Korengal against direct orders because you knew something everyone else didn't? Alex paused, considering her answer carefully. What I knew, Captain, was that there's a difference between what's officially impossible and what's actually impossible. That gap is where innovation lives. She gestured toward the mountains surrounding the base. I just drew a new line on an old map. You and your generation are redrawing the entire atlas. Later that evening, as the sun set behind the Hindu Kush Mountains, Alex stood alone on an observation platform watching A-10s returning from their missions. Each aircraft represented not just a weapon system, but a philosophy about how America protected its troops in harm's way, close enough to see, precise enough to matter, tough enough to survive. Her hand unconsciously moved to her father's watch, the chronograph that had accompanied 2 generations of Harringtons into combat skies. The inscription had worn slightly from years of contact with her skin, but remained legible. When lives hang in the balance, fly with your heart. Iron Bill had been right. The most important instrument in any cockpit wasn't mechanical or electronic. It was the moral compass that guided difficult decisions when rules and reality diverged. As darkness settled over the mountains where 381 Americans had once faced death, until a pilot refused to accept the impossible, Lieutenant Colonel Alexandra Harrington contemplated the journey that had brought her here, from rule breaker to rule maker, from crisis innovator to doctrine architect. The circle was complete, yet ever expanding. Each new pilot trained in her methods, each life saved by techniques once deemed impossible, it extended the legacy beyond anything she could have imagined on that decisive day when she chose to launch against orders. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new valleys, new moments when doctrine and duty might seem at odds. But tomorrow would also bring pilots equipped with both the technical skill and the moral clarity to navigate those complexities, to find the narrow path between reckless disregard for rules and rigid adherence to outdated protocols. In that balance lay the true art of air combat leadership. Not in breaking rules for the sake of independence, nor in following them blindly despite changing realities, but in understanding their purpose deeply enough to know when evolution was necessary. As the last A-10 touched down for the evening, its distinctive silhouette unmistakable against the darkening sky, Alex recalled the words she spoke to every new class. The map never stops. Sometimes someone just has to draw the next line. She had drawn hers. Now others were drawing theirs, extending the boundaries of what was possible, ensuring that when Americans found themselves in impossible valleys, the sky above would not remain silent. 381 souls saved, 0 friendly casualties during extraction. Numbers that had once represented a desperate gamble now symbolized a doctrine transformed, a capability enhanced, a promise fulfilled. The difference between the impossible and the possible had never been about physics or technology. It had always been about the human element, the determination of those willing to prepare relentlessly for moments when everything would depend on their skill and courage. Lieutenant Colonel Alexandra Harrington had proven that simple truth on a day when rules said 381 Americans must die and her heart said otherwise. In doing so, she had not just saved lives in one valley on one day. She had created a legacy that would save countless others in valleys yet unseen, challenges yet unimagined. And that in the final analysis was the most important mission any warrior could accomplish, not just to win today's battle, but to ensure tomorrow's warriors entered their battles better prepared, better supported, and never forced to choose between following orders and saving lives. It was, her father would have agreed, a worthy use of a pilot's heart.